If you manage vacation rentals in a FIFA World Cup host city, you're likely expecting massive demand this summer. But do you know how much to charge? And do you know what your minimum stay strategy should be? In this episode, we're breaking down how you should price, what your minimum stay tactics should be, and how you need to react as bookings come in. This is the first episode of STR Pricing Pulse. Welcome to STR Pricing Pulse, a new monthly series from Launchbase where we cut through the noise and focus on what the data is actually telling us about pricing and demand in the world of vacation rentals. I'm James Varley, the co-founder of Launchbase, which helps short-term rental businesses with revenue management and marketing. If you would like a bespoke and in-depth Launchbase audit for your business, head to our website to book a call. It's launchbase.club. Now, this series is powered by Beyond, our exclusive data partner who provide the market and pricing statistics behind every episode. And with me to digest the data is my Launchbase co-founder and revenue management guru, Zak Ali. How's it going, Zak?
It's going great. Thanks, James. Good to be here. Good to be talking about all things data.
It certainly is. All right, then, let's break it down. So the FIFA World Cup 2026 will be hosted across Canada, Mexico, and the United States, with matches spread across 16 host cities from the 11th of June to the 19th of July. Now, Zak, you've been crunching the numbers and looking at the 2018 World Cup in Russia to give us a comparable benchmark. So tell us, what did you learn from the 2018 data? And why does it matter today?
Absolutely. So I think one sentence kind of like summarizes everything that happened in 2018 for the World Cup in Russia. And I found that demand materialized across the host markets, but many operators were still underperforming massively. Now, if we go into that a little bit more in terms of what I saw in the data, that wasn't necessarily due to the fact that demand didn't actually show up. It did, but it was more in line with normal seasonal habits. So operators applied normal seasonal habits to abnormal events. And I think the same mistake appeared, well, I saw in the data, the same mistake appeared again and again. So just to kind of like give you a few more points to that in terms of what I mean about the mistakes that appeared again and again. First mistake I saw was the fact that the entire tournament window was priced the same, which is crazy. And then also at the same time, minimum stays were applied too broadly, if you like. And more importantly, they were applied very early, completely missing the reaction window. Peak nights also sold too cheaply, whilst shoulder nights basically failed to convert. And most importantly, in what I saw in the data, is that late panic discounting largely eroded the revenue that could simply not be recovered.
Interesting. So the operators here are thinking, right, the World Cup's taking place for about a month, 5 weeks. We're going to be inundated with people every single night. And they're not taking into account that peak demand is going to be on match days or around match days, because there's going to be a lot of time during the tournament where you're not going to have matches in your city. So it's silly really to expect wild demand for the entire tournament. You need to kind of cherry pick the dates, right?
Absolutely. We've talked about it a lot in other conversations we've held. What's the critical factor here is understanding what the reaction window is. So the reaction window is when are bookers really converting, if you like. And that's a really important goal, just generally when you're in revenue management, but more importantly, when you are managing events. I think across past global events, and this is what I saw in the Beyond data, where I saw very clear 3 patterns that were constantly repeating. And the first pattern that I observed was the fact that demand concentrates largely around those match days. I mean, that's not breaking news, but that's obviously the obvious. But sometimes, unfortunately, operators tend to miss the obvious. It didn't concentrate around the entire tournament window. In addition to that, the booking behaviors shift, especially around the dates that really matter the most. So it's really important to understand what the shift actually is before you actually go ahead and apply a universal strategy, if you like. And then thirdly, what I saw in the data was the fact that the revenue gap between the confident operator and the reactive operator basically widened very quickly, very fast.
We've spoken a lot in data and revenue management circles in the last few years about the Taylor Swift effect and more recently the Oasis effect. So do operators who are operating in FIFA World Cup host cities need to think of match days as kind of concert days and not expect that 3 days before and 4 days after they're going to have loads of demand?
Exactly, because what you have to remember, James, is the demand will show up. That's a given. Demand will show up at the moment that it's due to show up. It won't show up before, it won't show up after. The question that needs to be answered here is whether your pricing and your controls simply help to capture the demand that's going to show up, or are you quietly going to leak the value? Now, it comes back to what kind of problem is it that we're trying to resolve here. It's why I would call it execution and not demand. And that simply determines the outcome that you're going to achieve from an operator's point of view, where you can really go ahead and capitalize that one core day and achieve revenues, which is equivalent to that one whole week.
Makes sense. Okay, then let's shift forward to 2026. With the help of Beyond, of course, you've been looking at where the host cities stand today versus the same time period last year. So what's the data telling you right now?
Yeah, very interesting. Absolutely. Obviously, we saw a spike in search. Beyond offers search data, search insight, and obviously we saw what the spikes were like when the announcements actually happened. Now, naturally, that was a spike. A lot of people would generally see that spike in the search data and then react to that. I think that's where the power of search actually comes into the mix here. That, remember, that's not confirmed demand. That's just more intention, and it kind of like explains to you, okay, how many people are interested, but it's not confirmed in terms of what's actually happened. So you take that as a guidance to then be able to determine what kind of demand it is that you're working with. But in terms of the actual data that we saw, I mean, looking at the World Cup host cities today, if you like, compared to the same point last year, we are already seeing clear movement in both occupancy and rates, but not in a uniformed way, if you like. So some cities are showing stronger on the books occupancies. For example, in the data, I remember seeing Miami and Boston, which were up on average, I think it was around about 14% year on year. And others such as LA and Houston were seeing more rate movement ahead of volume. I think the average increase was something around about 150% year on year from what I saw in the data. But what was really interesting was the fact that there were some markets out there, such as Kansas and Toronto, which were seeing a more balanced approach. So the average occupancy increase was around 27%, 27%, and the ADR was, I think, over 300%, 350% in terms of the increase that we were seeing there, which was taking a more balanced approach.
All right, then. So we're a few months from the tournament kicking off. What do hosts and property managers need to do right now if they want to capture this demand?
So I think your goal right now is fairly simple. You've got to protect your peak value without losing flexibility on the nights that really still need to convert normally. And in terms of, if I were to give you actions right now, in terms of operators, if you like, I think the first action I would give you is price match nights first, not the whole nights for the whole month all at once. So focus on the the match nights specifically. Keep the second option would be keep the connector and background nights bookable and visible. And then my next action would be watch for likely demand spikes, which more than likely would happen around March time when the key qualifier outcomes are confirmed and intent, which is that search intent that we've spoken about, becomes more concrete for many travelers. And I think in terms of my last practical action for now, it would be do not wait for your calendar to look full before you actually start to do something about it. So the best demand often books first, and be prepared for it. I think as a quick self-check, if you like, from an operator's point of view, if you raised prices across every night, then you've probably gone a little bit too far. But then at the same time, if you've done nothing, or if you've done nothing at the moment, if you like, for your match nights, you're most likely leaving value on the table.
So let's look at this really practically then. So if you've got a match day, let's say you've got a match day on the 20th of June in your city, would it be 20th of June, 19th of June, 21st of June that you're thinking, right, okay, these are the nights that I need to boost my rates a bit, and then the other nights I'm going to kind of keep them level or maybe a little bit higher than normal? Like, very practically and simply, like, what would you be thinking of?
I mean, be led by the data, right? See what the data tells you in terms of what is converting. Naturally, we would say those connector nights, if you like, could be priced a little bit higher than the match nights, because more than likely you will pick up multiple night demand. But in terms of the additional nights, I think if you do go ahead and price those nights higher than you would just generally, I think you will be pricing yourselves out of the market and dropping on conversion, specifically for the other periods, off the back of the fact that you might assume people will stay. I think it's really important to have a look at who is searching, what they are searching for initially, and then understand how that search activity or that search intent is converting into demand.
Okay, so in terms of data now actually is a good time to mention Beyond, who are our exclusive data partners, of course. Now, most short-term rental operators lose revenue because they're pricing off outdated or incomplete data. Beyond changes that with real-time market trends and billions of data points from actual bookings. Beyond helps you price based on your market's unique trends. And it works. Beyond users consistently outperform the competition by 20% or more in revenue. So stop guessing and start pricing with data you can trust. Visit beyondpricing.info/Launchbase and turn better data into better profit. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to scan the QR code on screen. And if you're listening across our audio platforms, there's a link in the show notes. Okay then, Zach, so moving on, let's talk about minimum stay strategy. What's your advice to hosts who want to maximize revenue during the World Cup? And I'm thinking here, everything is kind of built around the match days. And you're probably going to expect a lot of demand for these 1 and 2 night stays. But what's your take on it?
Okay, so I think a simple approach that would work for most operators, first things first, early phase. So protect your peak slightly and keep shoulders flexible. I think in addition to that, you have to have a look at your pace. So as pace strengthens, tighten really only where demand proves it actually deserves to be tightened. And then my last point, in terms of the approach that would work, is kind of like tied in with the first point, but it's actually all about remaining flexible across the season, across the period that you are impacted in terms of the event, because flexibility, remember, will avoid gaps. If you have pride and you want to be very restrictive, remember, it's not going to pay the bills. You are going to miss out on core opportunities that the World Cup will present.
I'm sure you'll say, look at the data here, but there'll be some host cities which are more traditional vacation spots that will probably expect longer stays and people are still going to be in the area going on holiday. Whereas some host cities, they're probably not going to get the usual influx of tourists. So they probably have to have a tighter minimum stay strategy, or maybe a shorter minimum stay strategy. Where do you stand on that?
I mean, there probably will be still some business that is going to come to the operators, which isn't directly linked to the event. Absolutely. But yeah, you do need to look at the data, but at the same time, you need to look at the active interest that you are getting within your area. So it goes back to the whole search intent that we've spoken about. How many people are actively searching for those dates specifically for your area, for your property? That will naturally give you an understanding of how much demand you can expect to achieve for that period. Now, if we know that supply is going to be greater than the actual demand, then you have to take that into consideration when you are setting your whole pricing strategy, and that's inclusive of the length of stays and flexibility. If you know that general transient-led demand, so holiday-led demand, is going to be stronger, then naturally you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. So it is about drawing that fine line, but obviously you're led by the data. And in addition to the actual booking data, the search intent data, which is critical especially in times like this.
You've mentioned the search intent data quite a lot, and I'm sure there are hosts and property managers out there thinking, how do I track this? Like, how do I find out? What would your advice be to those people?
Yeah, of course. So with regards to the search data, then, I mean, there's lots of ways you can qualify who's actually searching for your property. Naturally, from the data that I've observed, obviously, I've taken a look at Beyond search data. Now, they do a fantastic job in collecting the search data and then supporting the price recommendations and behaviors with that search data, which then helps the price recommendations be a lot more accurate. So, for all those people who are using Beyond, you have that functionality available within your system. Now, if you are using other tools, then I guess looking at your website performance, if you have a large amount of web traffic coming to your website, is another area. Obviously, the OTAs do give you some search data, not to the extent that you might be able to get off your website, or that Beyond, for example, can provide in terms of the granularity, such as the dates that are being searched, the length of stays that are being searched, all those things. So I think realistically, it comes back to the tools that you're actually using. But what's really important about the search data is not just looking at it and thinking, oh, okay, great, this is another bit of data that I can see here. What does it actually mean? I think what's really important is for you to really drill down in that data to then determine what it is that data is actually telling you. So like I've said, what dates are being searched? What's the length of stays that are being looked at? Where are the searches coming from? How many, it tells you how many adults, what is the actual customer mix, if you like, those kind of things. You need to take all that information into consideration for then you to be able to define what the right revenue strategy, the right pricing approach is going to be for you, specifically with this event.
Makes sense. So yeah, if you're not already using Beyond, check them out. There's a lot of data at your fingertips. All right then, Zach, so let's imagine, let's give a scenario here. Let's imagine that your calendar's looking pretty empty, close to the big kickoff. Imagine maybe we're in May time and you're looking at your calendar and thinking, oh my goodness, the World Cup's just around the corner and I haven't got anywhere near as many bookings as I expected. What should you do in that scenario?
Yeah, it's not a great position to be in, is it? But what I'm going to say first of all is don't panic. Do not panic if that is the situation. Generally, empty does not mean that you failed in a mega event pattern, because remember, and also we've seen it in the 2018 data, late demand is very common. I mean, late demand is generally very common in this kind of event, especially once the fixtures drive the real travel decisions, given the fact that they will tell you, when that demand is due to come. And then also at the same time, travelers stop browsing and start committing. So focus on the late demand. Don't be too panicky about it, and don't go crazy and start dropping prices or, doing things that you really shouldn't be doing, which is going to cause you to leave revenue on the table. I think also, just to add there, if you are behind, the recovery sequence matters a lot. So if it was myself and I was in that situation, the way I would deal with it from an operator's point of view, probably in this specific order, is that I would actually reopen my connector nights first, because naturally that's where you can pick up demand without diluting the peak value. And then at the same time, as a point two, if you like, I would relax my restrictions before actually going ahead and having to reduce the prices. Because what we've seen in the data is the fact that rules often block conversion more than rate does. So you've got to be really clear in terms of what is the barrier to entry there. I think from a point three point of view, after you've done those two, then you can go ahead and adjust prices, but adjust them surgically, only on the specific nights that are actually underperforming and not the whole window, because that's really where the revenue leak would happen, especially through a stage of panic discounting across the entire period.
Yeah, really good point you make there about the visibility. I mean, for example, if your rules are minimum 3-night stay and everybody's searching for 1 or 2 nights, you're just not going to get seen, even if your rates are pretty competitive, right?
That's exactly it. But, more so rather than just on event days, that approach should be taken across your whole trading year. There's so many operators out there who are restricted in terms of the length of stay that they do offer. And that's really, I know you're going to tell me I'm talking about search again, but it's really powerful in terms of the data. It tells you exactly, it answers those questions, right? So what you might be priced, or you might have a length of stay restriction of 3 nights, but the search into your property, into your area might be 2 nights or even 1 night within a different season, for example. So before you set your restrictions, you need to be absolutely certain that you understand your market in terms of what the length of stay restriction is telling you, rather than you realistically, setting those unrealistic expectations for yourself.
Yeah, and you also made the point as well that later on in the tournament, there will be matches taking place. I think it's the last 32, last 16, quarterfinals, semi-finals, final, but we don't know which teams are going to be involved in those matches because the group stage hasn't happened yet. So most of the search intent at the moment is going to be looking at those group stage matches, because we know which teams are going to be playing in which host cities. And that's what you were talking about before with the later demand. That's when, like, if England make the semi-finals, for example, there's going to be a lot of fans from England thinking, right, how can I get to the States? How can I get a ticket and go to that host city? So you've kind of got a half the tournament. You've got the group stage where we know where everybody's going just about. We've got the final qualifiers coming up in March, but then you've got the other half of the tournament where we don't know yet, and that's why we're going to see a lot of last minute demand for those knockout matches.
Absolutely. I think, whether you're a fan or not, you have to follow the event if you are one of the host cities, especially because, it will definitely assist you in that intent, in understanding exactly what is going on. So yeah, absolutely follow the event and set your expectations and your goals accordingly.
So then, if you were based in a World Cup host city running a property management business, what do you think good performance would look like?
In terms of good performance then, so I think, well, the way I would approach it is good World Cup revenue management is not about being aggressive, right? It's about being correct. And I think there's a couple of points that I would look at. So number one, I would look to see my peaks are protected and I've priced with a lot more confidence in that sense. I think also as a point number two, my connector nights stay flexible and visible. Again, it's very important for all the reasons we've mentioned. I think also, in addition to that, the background nights are allowed to behave like normal summer demand would. Obviously, we then want to ensure that we are capitalizing on other customers, not just the event customers. And then finally, I think, decisions are made by pace and not by fear. And I think that's really why it's so important and something that I would continuously look at, is to understand the pace of the business that's coming into your property, to then be able to really allow you to see, okay, well, I know truly I'm doing good here in terms of being on the curve.
Makes a lot of sense. Zak, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the first episode of STR Pricing Pulse.
My pleasure.
All right, fantastic to hear from Zak there on the first episode of STR Pricing Pulse, and we'd love to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment and tell us, are you hosting in a World Cup host city in 2026? And what's your biggest pricing concern right now? We will tackle the most common questions in a future episode. And if you found this useful, hit like and subscribe wherever you watch or listen. New episodes will drop every single month. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments or email james@launchbase.club. This is STR Pricing Pulse from Launchbase, powered by Beyond. Until next time, happy hosting.